I want to take you inside a moment that happened on camera. Stephen Bartlett looked at me across the table. Cameras rolling, millions of eventual viewers. And he asked me a simple question. Are you optimistic about the future of America? I said no, just that. No, not no, but. Not no, however. No. The studio went quiet for a moment. And then I said something in the next 60 seconds that the podcast title completely buried. Something that 6 million people who watched that episode mostly missed because the no was so shocking that most people stopped processing what came after it. What I said in those 60 seconds is the most important financial warning I have ever delivered on camera. More important than the no itself, more specific, more actionable, more personally relevant to every ordinary American who is trying to protect their savings right now. And I am going to tell you exactly what I said and exactly what it means for your money, because the no got all the attention. But the 60 seconds after the no is what changes everything about what you need to do right now. I said this. The people who will be okay are the ones who understand what is happening and have the right assets. And the people who will not be okay are the people who do not understand what is happening and have the wrong assets. That is it. That is what got buried under the headline of the no. Not a warning about government policy, not a prediction about interest rates or inflation or geopolitical conflict. A direct personal statement about two groups of people, the ones who will be okay and the ones who will not, and the single variable that determines which group you are in, not your income, not your education, not how hard you have worked or how carefully you have saved, what assets you hold right now. Today, while most people are still focused on the no and not on the 60 seconds that followed it. I have spent 50 years studying the difference between those two groups across every major financial crisis in recorded history. I know precisely what separates them. I know precisely which assets put you in the okay group and which assets put you in the not okay group in the specific environment America is entering right now. Stay with me through every single minute of this video, because at the halfway point, I am going to show you the specific documented case that proves beyond any doubt what the right assets and the wrong assets are. A case so precise and so personally devastating that when I studied it in the weeks after that podcast recording, I felt the full weight of what the 60 seconds after the no actually means for ordinary American families right now. Do not skip a single second. The people who will not be okay are the people who heard the no and moved on without understanding the 60 seconds that followed. Subscribe right now. What I am about to share took 50 years of studying exactly what separates the people who survive financial crises from the people who do not. Let me start by explaining what I actually meant when I said the people who will be okay are the ones who have the right assets, because most people hear that and immediately assume it means the wealthy, the already rich, the people with investment portfolios and financial advisors and access to sophisticated instruments that ordinary people cannot reach. That is not what I meant. And the evidence from every single financial crisis I have ever studied proves that it is not what I meant. The people who had the right assets during the German hyperinflation of 1923 were not the wealthiest Germans. They were the Germans who held gold and real productive assets regardless of how much or how little they had. The factory worker who converted his savings to gold in 1921 survived what the wealthy banker who held government bonds did not because the factory worker was richer, because he had the right assets. The people who had the right assets during the Argentine crisis of 2001 were not the wealthiest Argentines. They were the Argentines who held their savings in dollar accounts outside the Argentine banking system, regardless of how modest those savings were. The school teacher who opened a foreign account in 1999 preserved everything. The doctor who held pesos in a local bank lost everything when the accounts were frozen. Not because the school teacher was wealthier, because she had the right assets. The people who had the right assets during the British pound's 20-year decline after Suez were not the wealthiest British. They were the British families who held gold and international assets rather than pound-denominated bonds and cash savings. Not because of their wealth level, because of their asset choices. This is what the 60 seconds after the no was actually about, not a warning directed at the wealthy, a warning directed at every ordinary American who is currently holding the wrong assets, and a promise that the people who switch to the right assets, regardless of how much or how little they have, will be in the okay group when the trajectory I said no to produces its inevitable consequences. Now, I need to stop here and tell you something personal before I show you the case study I promised, because the weight of what I am describing requires some personal context. In 1982, I sat in an empty office with nothing. I had publicly predicted a depression, borrowed $4,000 from my father, wife, and 2 young sons depending on me, and I faced the most honest professional question of my career. Not what did the markets get wrong? What did I get wrong about which people survive financial crises and which people do not? What I discovered in that forced period of brutal self-examination was the thing that the 60 seconds after the no was built on. The variable that determines which group you end up in is never income, never education, never intelligence. It is always the same thing across every case I have ever studied. Asset choice, made before the crisis. While the wrong assets still look fine on the surface, while the right assets still feel slightly premature and perhaps even unnecessary. The people who make the right asset choices before the crisis survive. The people who make them during the crisis often find it too late. The people who make them after the crisis wished they had made them before. This is what I was thinking in the 60 seconds after the no, and this is why those 60 seconds matter more than the no itself. Now let me show you the case that proved this to me more powerfully than any other in 50 years of research. I want to take you to Iceland in 2008. Iceland was by almost every measure a modern, wealthy, well-functioning democracy. GDP per capita among the highest in the world. Literacy rate essentially 100%. A highly educated population with sophisticated financial understanding. A well-developed banking system. A stable democratic government. Everything that most people would point to as evidence that a country could not experience a catastrophic financial crisis of the kind that happens to poorly managed developing economies. In October 2008, Iceland's 3 major banks collapsed simultaneously. The banks had assets worth 10 times Iceland's entire GDP. When they failed, the consequences for ordinary Icelandic families were immediate and personal. The Icelandic krona lost more than 50% of its value against major currencies within weeks. Ordinary Icelandic families who had taken out loans denominated in foreign currencies, which had seemed like a smart financial move during the good years, suddenly owed twice as much in kroner as they had borrowed. Interest rates rose to 18% to defend what remained of the currency. Home values collapsed. Unemployment tripled. The government was forced to accept an IMF bailout with conditions that imposed severe austerity on ordinary Icelanders who had nothing to do with creating the banking crisis that destroyed their financial security. Now, here is the specific detail that I want you to hold in your mind. The Icelandic families who had the right assets before October 2008 did not experience any of what I just described. Not the currency collapse, not the doubling of loan obligations, not the 18% interest rates, not the collapsed home values, not the austerity. They experienced the crisis the way a person in a warm house experiences a blizzard. They could see it through the window. They could understand its severity, but they were protected from its direct impact by the specific asset choices they had made in the years before it arrived. What were those right assets? Gold held outside the Icelandic banking system, foreign currency deposits in stable jurisdictions, real productive assets whose value was not denominated in kroner, businesses that generated revenue in foreign currencies. The ordinary Icelandic factory worker who held 15% of his savings in gold and 10% in a foreign currency account was okay. The highly educated Icelandic professional who held all his savings in kroner-denominated accounts and krona-denominated bonds was not okay. Not because the factory worker was smarter, because he had the right assets. This is precisely what the 60 seconds after the no was about. Now let me show you specifically which assets are the right ones and which are the wrong ones for the American environment right now. And I want to be as specific and as honest as I was in that studio with Stephen Bartlett. The wrong assets for America right now are the ones whose value depends on the dollar maintaining its current purchasing power, on the Federal Reserve maintaining its independence, on foreign buyers continuing to purchase Treasury bonds at sustainable rates, and on the political system finding the will to address a $2 trillion annual deficit before the bond market forces it to. Cash in savings accounts. The interest rate your bank pays you is below the real inflation rate created by the money printing that finances the deficit. Your cash loses real purchasing power every month. The number stays the same. The real value declines. This is Iceland's kroner in 2006. Fine on the surface, quietly being undermined. Long-duration treasury bonds. Fixed payments in a currency being debased to manage obligations that $5 trillion in annual tax revenue cannot cover. The Icelandic professional who held government bonds denominated in a currency that subsequently lost 50% did not suffer a default. He received every promised payment in a currency worth half what it was when he invested. This is the mechanism. This is the wrong asset. Conventional equity index funds at current valuations. The S&P 500 trading at price-to-earnings ratios that exceed the 1929 bubble peak, denominated in a currency under debasement pressure. In an economy where consumer sentiment sits at 53. 3. In a political environment where the fiscal correction that could stabilize the trajectory is impossible before November 2026. These are the wrong assets. Not because America is Iceland, but because the mechanism that made them wrong in Iceland is operating in America right now. And the 60 seconds after the no was a direct personal statement that the people holding these assets without understanding what they are holding will be in the not okay group. Now here are the right assets. And I want you to hear this not as investment advice, but as the specific answer to the specific question that the 60 seconds after the no was addressing. Gold is the first and most important right asset, not because gold is exciting, not because it generates income, because gold is the one financial asset that no government can create more of, that no central bank decision can debase, that no political dysfunction can make worth less. In Iceland, in 2008, the Icelandic families who held gold preserved their real wealth completely through a crisis that destroyed the savings of everyone around them. In Argentina, in 2001, the families who held gold were unaffected by the account freezes that devastated their neighbors. In Britain, after Suez, the families who held gold built generational wealth through the 2 decades of pound decline that eroded everyone else's savings. I have 10 to 15% of the portfolios I advise in gold specifically because of what I know about which assets put you in the OK group. GLD and IAU provide direct gold exposure through any standard brokerage account. The cost of not having this exposure is not the return you miss on gold itself. It is the real purchasing power you lose on the wrong assets while the mechanism operates. Treasury, inflation, protected securities are the second right asset. TIPS legally adjust their principal with inflation. They provide a guaranteed real return above whatever inflation the money printing produces, not a speculative bet on inflation, a legal guarantee. The iShares TIPS Bond ETF with ticker TIP provides access through any standard brokerage account. The Icelandic families who held inflation-protected instruments rather than nominal krona bonds preserved their purchasing power. The ones who held nominal bonds did not. International diversification is the third right asset. The Icelandic factory worker who held foreign currency deposits was okay. The professional who held only kroner was not. The mechanism that makes international diversification a right asset in America right now is the same mechanism. When a currency is being debased to manage obligations that cannot be covered by taxation alone, assets denominated in other currencies appreciate in terms of the debasing currency. VXUS provides broad international equity exposure. Today, not eventually. Commodity-producing businesses are the fourth right asset. Companies whose revenues automatically rise with the inflation that debasement produces. Energy producers. Agricultural companies. Mining companies. These businesses were the best performing assets during every period of significant currency debasement I have ever studied. VDE for energy exposure, XLP for consumer staples, both through any standard brokerage account. The fifth right asset is the most important and the least tangible. Understanding. Specifically, understanding what the 60 seconds after the no was actually saying. That the variable separating the OK group from the not OK group is asset choice. Made now. Before the crisis makes the choice more expensive or impossible. The Icelandic factory worker did not know in 2006 that Iceland's banking system would collapse in 2008. He did not have inside information or special access or sophisticated financial modeling. He simply understood that holding all his savings in a small country's currency and that country's government bonds was a concentration risk that history consistently punished. And he diversified into assets that would protect him if that concentration risk materialized. At a time when doing so felt slightly premature and perhaps even unnecessary. That is the right asset choice, not knowing when. Understanding the direction, and making the choice while there is still time to make it at reasonable cost. I said no when Stephen Bartlett asked if I was optimistic about America's future. 6 million people heard the no. Most of them moved on. The 60 seconds after the no told the people who were really listening everything they needed to know. The people who will be okay are the ones who understand what is happening and have the right assets. The people who will not be okay are the ones who do not understand what is happening and have the wrong assets. You have now heard both the no and the 60 seconds. You understand what is happening. The only remaining question is whether you have the right assets. Gold, TIPS, international diversification, commodity producers. Understanding. These are the right assets. They are available to you today through any standard brokerage account. They do not require wealth or sophistication or special access. They require only the decision to be in the OK group before the not OK becomes undeniable to everyone. Make that decision today. Not this week. Today. Because the people who were okay in Iceland made their decisions in 2006 and 2007, not in October 2008 when the banks were already closing. If this video gave you the 60 seconds that 6 million people missed, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we are tracking every development of this together in real time. and leave one honest comment below. After everything you just heard, are you currently in the okay group or the not okay group based on the assets you hold right now? Write it below honestly. I read every single comment personally, and I will see you in the next video.